And the best way I can describe how they looked to an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old from New Jersey of that generation, I've written it. I've written how they reminded me of or looked like any combination of three of the four Three Stooges. Two of them were bald, and one of them, the two were about 6 feet tall and bald. One was about 5, 6, or 7, and had essentially a bald head with a fringe of brown hair around his bald pate. And they didn't look particularly athletic, but they were rather muscle-bound, fairly muscle-bound. And they looked, for example, like human beings would look if they were the result of a more keen struggle for survival on their planet. In other words, they looked almost like natural athletes, even though they didn't have really striking physiques as bodybuilders would. But they looked very fit physically, and they looked highly intelligent. The two of them looked like were bald guys with big heads, as if they had really substantial intelligence. And the shorter guy looked like a professor. He was a very distinguished, intelligent-looking person. But they looked essentially like us. And they walked past me, and they were wearing these tight-fitting silver spacesuits, kind of like neoprene wetsuit type, form-fitting jumpsuits. And the chest was covered with a blood-red crest, and then on that crest was a single emblem, which was a yellow lightning bolt going from the top to the bottom, with the jagged edge of the lightning bolt at the bottom of this five-sided crest on their chest. So this was apparently the astronaut garb of the indigenous Martians. These were the Martians, my dad was telling me, we're going to meet over at Curtiss-Wright, and we met them. And as they walked past us there on the loading dock to get into their ship, the one who was walking third turned to my father, and in a very intelligent and courteous way said, "Well, Ray, it was a pleasure visiting your beautiful planet again, and a privilege to be with you again. And thank you so much for introducing us to your young son, Andy." Because my dad had introduced me in the room. And my dad said, "Well, it was great to see you three again, and I hope we can meet again." And my dad was just being very, very diplomatic, almost as if he had worked with these three gentlemen but didn't really know them that well. Like he would be polite to colleagues in the aerospace community that you were on a project with, but weren't best of friends with. And they walked down along the edge of the stage there, the loading dock, and they got into their ship, and they closed the hatch, and they went put out across the floor of the hangar, and then they started to do a big loop around the tarmac. We could see from the hangar. We were standing in the hangar and kind of following them, but we were still in the hangar, and they were out in the tarmac. And the engineer standing next to me was one of my dad's colleagues there I wouldn't say at Curtiss-Wright, because my dad was already working for Parsons, but one of the engineers who was there said, "Now watch this, Andy, you're not going to believe this." And as the Martian ship completed its loop and got to kind of the home stretch, it was only going about, I would say, maybe 20 or 40 miles an hour, not really that fast, but it was making this big loop, and then it hit the straightaway, and it just, in 3 very sudden pulses of speed, just took off at an incredible rate of speed, horizontally across the tarmac, and then shot up at a 45-degree angle and disappeared. And that was the most striking display of high technology I've ever seen before or since.
Wow.
That craft went from about 40 miles per hour to 4,000 to 8,000 to 12,000, so that by the time it got out of my field of vision and I could see it shoot up, it was a blur. It was literally a blur. So we know from this event that by around 1970, the U.S. Defense Department, including engineers like my father, were in liaison with human beings like us on the planet Mars. Now, what had my father done for the U.S. Defense Department? Well, I'm in possession of his 1964 resume, which is an ancient document under the law of evidence that's self-authenticating. And what his 1964 resume shows, that was written, 44 years ago, so it's more than 20 years old. It shows that he had worked on the ramjet engine
You're so fascinating that I don't like. I want to have you continue speaking at the same time. I have all these questions, but I'll save them for later.
Okay, I just want to narrate all the Martian data points because I think it shows that the U.S. government was definitely prioritizing Mars and the Martian presence there, and its quantum access activities were definitely focused on Mars, even when I was on Pegasus as a kid. Because here we find, my father had been working for Okanite in Paramus, New Jersey in 1952, and he explained to me one time, and this is again validated by his 1964 resume. He'd been working for a civilian engine, company, an industrial company, and he narrated for me one time how an army attaché showed up at his desk at Okanite and gave him orders to report to Curtiss Wright to work on metallurgy on the Ramjet engine project. The Ramjet was a high-performance jet engine that by pulling either molecules of oxygen or later space dust, even in outer space, across a pressure differential and ejecting it at a high rate of speed, would be able to achieve supersonic speeds in our atmosphere and near-Earth environment in space. And my dad was essentially conscripted into the Ramjet project at Curtiss Wright by the U.S. Defense Department because he had a background in metallurgy, and they wanted him to find an alloy that the Ramjet hull and engine could be made of so that the plane wouldn't melt from friction in our atmosphere. And he did, as I recall. But it was a very stressful part of his career there in 1952 to 55. In fact, he was at Curtiss Wright when he worked on that. His resume from 1964 also shows that he was principally involved in the B-70 development project, which was the strategic bomber from World War II that the Defense Department wanted to put a nuclear reactor engine on so that it could travel in an unlimited way, both to bomb the Soviet Union if we needed to, and to protect ourselves from the extraterrestrial presence. As I've talked about it, there were really two concerns that the U.S. Defense Department had at that time, and they both had colors. It was basically the grays and the reds. They were worried about the extraterrestrial visitations that were occurring and the abductions that were beginning that had already been documented. And they were also concerned about, believe it or not, a land invasion of North America by the Soviet Army. Okay, so they wanted to have a strategic bomber that they could repel such an invasion with that wouldn't have to refuel in flight. So my dad had been on some very advanced and sensitive aerospace projects, and I think it's in that context that he must have been consulting with these Martian aviators at Curtiss Wright, because they were clearly there for some kind of technical meeting and were leaving. And my father just had either been asked by them or been instructed by the U.S. government to take me over on that Saturday morning when they were leaving so that I would meet these human beings from Mars and know that Mars has at least one humanoid species on it, very much like us. Now, who could these beings have been? Well, we know that in 9500 BC, years ago, there was a cataclysm in our solar system. We believe that what happened is that debris elements from the Vela supernova explosion entered our solar system and destroyed a planet that created the debris that it now is the asteroid belt, which is located in our solar system where mathematics indicates a planet should be, and then pummeled Mars very severely, squishing Mars into an oblate spheroid and actually fracturing the planet Mars, which may be another reason why we were in liaison with the Martians. Mars is fractured. And then also pummeled Earth. In fact, it was that event that ended the great maritime civilization on Earth that built the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx. We're not living in the original civilization on Earth. We're living in a second civilization, a successor civilization to the previous civilization that reached its apogee around 9500 BC. And that civilization centered in Cairo, Egypt, which Cairo means Mars, and it had a space launch platform in Lebanon, at Baalbek in Lebanon, which is a huge stone platform there that we believe they were using to reach space.